Morning. Good morning. My name is Barbara Cottrell, and I'm the Public Events Coordinator for the Seniors College. On behalf of the college, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for being with us. We are very fortunate this morning to be joined by Vernon Oickle. Vernon was born and raised in Liverpool, where he continues to live. He's an award-winning journalist and editor, and the author of 33 books, including the best-selling Ghost Stories of the Maritimes and Ghost Stories of Nova Scotia. Vernon is here to help us celebrate Halloween by telling us about Nova Scotia's ghosts. And we're also interested in hearing if you have any stories. If you have a question or a story, please click the raised hand icon on the bottom of your screen, and our tech team will connect you. If you wish to be seen, you'll need to tell our tech team and switch your camera on, and I'm sure they'll tell you how to do that. Before I hand over to Vernon, I want to give a nod to Donnelly Moulton, my fun-loving cohort who arranged today's lecture. Unfortunately, Donnelly can't be with us today, but she asked me to make sure you all know that ghosts frequently come over from England to Halifax. And they do this by flying, wait for it, British Scareways. And on that corny note, I'll turn you over to Vernon.
Thanks, Barbara. That's too funny, and you know, I'll have to remember that joke. I'm a terrible joke teller, so I won't tell jokes, but I hope I'm a pretty good storyteller. I'll try my best. First of all, thank you, Barbara, for the introduction, and thank you, Donna Lee, even though you're not with us, for reaching out and asking me to participate in this. It's a great event. I'm hoping I can deliver upon your expectations, and we can have a fun hour or so. As Barbara said, my name is Vernon, and I won't get into the whole background thing here. I'm just trying to get used to the idea of talking to my screen, because usually when I do this, it's in front of a crowd. It can be, you know, anywhere from 12 to 100 people, so sometimes larger. So anyway, the idea is to have fun with this, and I'm going to give you a few stories, and then thanks to the help of our tech crew, they're going to accommodate anybody who is listening, who wants to participate and exchange some stories and have some questions or whatever. We're going to try to accommodate that. And I always like to hear from other people, because, you know, if you're listening to me read or communicate or talk to you for an hour and a half, it can sometimes be boring. Please feel free. I love to hear other ghost stories. And just by way of saying that, I will stress that the stories we'll talk about are true ghost stories. Now, true in the sense that what I collect and relate to other people through my presentations or through my writings are experiences that people have had themselves, mostly themselves. Sometimes they'll convey experiences that other people have passed on to them, but by and large, these are true ghost stories as experienced by these people. And the other thing I want to stress about this is that when I started doing this research many years ago, I made a commitment to myself that when I go talk to people and collect their stories and share them with others, is I don't judge what people are telling me. You know, I have the philosophy that I'm a collector and a storyteller. I'm not here to judge what people tell me, because that's not my role. I know there are a lot of skeptics out there in the world, and some things that you hear and people talk about can seem really far-fetched. But it's not my role to say that's too fantastical, it just can't happen. I like to collect the stories and put them out there And then you, the reader or the listener, you can judge if you believe it or not. If we were doing this live in a room with other people, I would encourage people to keep their reactions, particularly if it's a negative reaction, in check, because if people are brave enough to share their story, we don't want to ridicule them or make them feel bad. People are reluctant to talk about their paranormal experiences as it is, or this has been my experience, primarily because they fear how other people will react to what they're saying. So, I encourage you to keep an open mind. And if somebody is sharing a story, just think, well, maybe, this did happen, because in these people's experiences, this did happen. The other thing I want to stress about my experiences with the paranormal and people who have had these experiences and shared their stories is that, by and large, I would say 96, 97% of the people who share their stories, uh, while their experiences are shocking and sometimes alarming because they weren't expecting to have it at a particular time or event or whatever. Um, so there's that normal reaction of, oh my gosh, did that happen? Did I see that? Was there somebody in the room with me or whatever? Once you come to terms with, yes, I did see that, most of these people take some comfort in knowing that there is perhaps something after life, our normal life, and they take some, it gives them a bit of comfort in thinking that maybe there is something else to go on to, and they find that particularly comforting. And despite what you may think, those people who talk about living with a spirit in their homes or living in a haunted house, as we label them, um, a lot of people aren't afraid of that experience. They have embraced it, and naturally they try to find out what's going on, and perhaps they do research on their property, or try to figure out who may be visiting them. But for the most part, people live with these spirits, and they've learned to accept them as part of the family even, and just go about their business, and they interact however the spirit wants. And a lot of times the spirits will manifest themselves in many different ways, either by moving an object, or it could be an odor, or just it could be a shadow, or it could be taking objects, things that disappear. So there's various ways, or you may have a physical experience with a spirit, and that you may, there's a lot of people will tell you about being on a set of stairs, and then all of a sudden they feel a breeze or a movement on the steps, and there's no one else with them physically that they can see, but in fact they do feel there's another presence. So there's various ways that you would encounter these spirits, but for the most part, it's shocking, but it's not always negative. So in getting into the meat of the presentation, I thought probably one of the best ways to sort of set the scene is gonna read from my one of my books, sort of the intro that I wrote for Those Stories of Nova Scotia, because I think it kind of sums up what I just said in a nice way. So if you'll bear with me, and if I stumble while I'm reading, I apologize for that. I do have my tea, so I'm fortified with some liquid here if my mouth gets dry. So anyways, let's get started. So are you afraid of things that go bump in the night? Have you ever thought you saw something from the corner of your eye, only to discover there was no one else there? Have you ever had the feeling that someone was watching you, but you were certain that you were alone? Does the sound of your house creaking remind you of footsteps, as if someone is coming up the stairs or down the hallway, only there is no one else in the house? Have you ever had the sensation that someone has touched you, or that someone has just rushed past you, only you didn't see anything? Have the doors or windows in your house ever opened and closed on their own? Has something you own ever gone missing, only to turn up in the most unusual places? If you've answered yes to even one of these questions, it's just possible that you have encountered a ghost, a specter, a spirit, apparition, or poltergeist. Call it whatever you want, but chances are great that in Nova Scotia, if you have experienced any of these sensations, then you then there may be another worldly explanation for what happened to you, as ghosts are known to roam throughout the province. I've seen them, I've felt them, experienced them, and best of all, I have met many others who have had similar experiences. Over the years, I have had the distinct pleasure of meeting many individuals who have welcomed me into their homes or invited me into their places of business to talk about their paranormal experiences. When it comes to ghostly encounters, everyone's experience is different. Some people embrace and welcome the spirit, while others are reluctant believers, readily admitting that they have always been skeptical until their minds were suddenly changed by the unexpected or the inexplicable. But that's okay because everyone reacts differently to things that can't be easily rationalized. The important thing, however, is to keep an open mind and never judge another person's experiences. I never tell anyone I don't believe that what they've told me, simply because there is no way I could possibly know for certain what they've seen, heard, or experienced. The paranormal world is very unpredictable, as the spirits exist on a different plane, and those who encounter a ghost or spirit are often caught off guard and are left unsure what they've experienced. For that reason, it is sometimes easy to dismiss or ridicule the witness as they relay their stories. But as a researcher and writer of these ghost stories, I invite you to suspend your disbelief and to simply enjoy these tales of the paranormal. Set aside your skepticism and suspend your logic, because such rationale has no place in this world. So that's kind of the approach I take. And when we have sessions um, in which we have an open discussion, it's fun to kind of set the rules and kind of get off on the right foot. And the other thing I do want to say before I get into one of the stories is um, as I said, I'm often asked if I'm a believer, and I say I don't not believe. The other thing is I will tell people that unlike the stories that Hollywood paints, for the most part, the spirits that we encounter, particularly in this part of the world, by and large, don't mean us any. I would say not by and large, but probably almost 100% of the time, don't mean us any harm. In fact, they may not even know you're there. They're certainly not sent by the devil to bring you back to hell, take your spirit or whatever from you. And unfortunately, Hollywood has created that image of spirits and ghosts because that's what sells. And we know that in Hollywood, that's the important thing for them. So I'm going to tell you that I believe that there are things in this universe that we cannot explain. And I like to think, or I challenge people to tell me that we know everything there is and that there is possibly no way that spirits or ghosts could exist, because we just simply do not know. There's been a lot of research done on this over the centuries, no question. A lot of scientific evidence that can rebut, or can it really rebut the fact that these things may exist. I'm not sure they can. Um, so I believe, and I believe because I've had personal experiences with the paranormal. And if you've ever had an experience, you'll know exactly what I'm saying. First of all, you'll know it when it happens. Secondly, it'll leave you thinking, what did I just, what just happened? And what does that tell me about the world I'm living in, or the time and space that I'm inhabiting? So I want to tell you about a personal encounter I had. I've written about it in my second book, More Ghost Stories of Nova Scotia, because um, while I was researching and preparing and working on this manuscript, I had this this personal experience that really confirmed for me that there's more out there that we just don't know, so much more. And it's confirmation that my approach to talking to people about their experience is the right approach, or I think it is, because this is very personal. So I'm going to just read it for you. It's easier to read it than to go into great detail. So here we go. I tried to be as concise as possible, but um, so this is a personal encounter. I have been researching, writing, and telling ghost stories for at least 4 decades, And while it is often difficult to explain some of the things I have encountered and experienced over the years, it's a subject that is near to my heart. One of the most, if not the most common questions I'm asked is whether I believe in ghosts. My answer is simple: I don't not believe. I appreciate that some things defy reality, and for that reason, I'm committed to always keeping an open mind. Furthermore, when someone relates their personal experiences, I never judge their sincerity or their compassion. That is not my role. I am a collector, a researcher, and a storyteller. I leave the final judgment to someone else, that someone being you, the reader, or you, the listener. All of that being said, I must confess that I do believe there are things that happen in this world that we cannot easily explain. Are we so naive that we believe humans are the only intelligent inhabitants of this world? I can say without hesitation that I have seen things and I have had experiences that led me to draw this conclusion. No, we are not. Anyone who has encountered a ghostly being or who has had a paranormal experience will tell you the experience was unlike anything they've previously witnessed or felt. For these people, such an encounter is confirmation that maybe, just maybe, there is something beyond the confines of our human world. Is there life after death? No one can say for sure, but whether you choose to believe it or not, encounters with the paranormal are real. That I can tell you with 100% certainty because I have had several such encounters over the years, the most recent being in the summer of 2018. Before I share my personal encounter, I will give you some backstory. I had a sister. Her name was Heather, and she was 2 years older than me. Her birthday was August 17th, 1959, and she died on September 19th, 1991, of complications from leukemia. She had bravely fought the disease for 2 years, but sadly, sometimes the body becomes too tired and too weak to continue fighting against the ravages of of such a disease. So I lost the only sibling I had. It was an ordeal to it was an ordeal I do not believe I will ever truly overcome. As children, Heather and I were close. I have many fond memories from my childhood of the good times we shared camping with the family and the times we did things that did not sit well with our parents. The infractions were nothing serious, mind you, just the regular run-of-the-mill childish mischief. As the oldest, Heather was the instigator, but I was usually game to do whatever she told me to do. When we got into trouble, we shared the punishment as a duo. But that was part of the fun, and those memories are as vivid today as if they had only happened yesterday. But life happens. I know that, and I accept the inevitable that awaits us all. It doesn't mean I have to like it, but I understand that when life throws some hardships in your direction, as it always does, you must find a way to move on, and I did that. It wasn't always easy, and there were times I miss Heather. It would be great to have someone to talk to, someone who shares a common history with me. Then there are times when I feel that she is still with me, and that brings me to my story. It was on the morning early on the morning of August 17th, 2018, the day that she that the day that would have been Heather's 59th birthday. In fact, it was shortly after 6 a.m. and my youngest son Colby and I were getting ready for work. We have a normal routine that we follow every day, but on this particular morning he called me to the bathroom for some assistance because his razor wasn't working properly. As I entered the bathroom, I closed the door behind me because my wife Nancy was still asleep and we didn't want to disturb her. I wasn't in the bathroom but a minute when Colby and I clearly heard a woman say to us, "Hurry up, I have to pee." The voice was loud and clear. The words were very distinguishable. In fact, I opened the door expecting to see my wife standing there and waiting to get into the bathroom, but to my surprise, there was no one there. "Did you see that?" I asked Colby. "Yes," he answered, nodding. "Mom needs the bathroom." Well, if she needed the bathroom so badly, where did she go? I checked throughout the house looking for whoever had asked to use the bathroom. Eventually, I made my way to the bedroom where I found my wife sound asleep in bed. Odd, I thought, because I was sure I had heard someone, a woman, ask to use the bathroom. Returning to my son, I asked Colby to tell me exactly what he heard. And he told me that he heard a woman say, "Hurry up, I have to pee." He then asked, "Wasn't that Mom?" No, I told him it was not, because his mother was still sleeping. Now, if I had been the only one to hear the voice, I would dismiss this as me just hearing things or as me having an overactive imagination. But the fact that the two of us both heard this woman say the same thing gave me reason to pause. If it wasn't Nancy asking to get into the bathroom, then who was it? I had no idea. In fact, I still have no idea who the voice belonged to. Perhaps it was because this happened on my sister's birthday, but the more I thought about what Colby and I had heard that morning, the more I began thinking about Heather. Eventually, I recalled that when she and I were children, she had developed this terrible habit of always wanting to get in the bathroom just as soon as someone else got in there. We only had one bathroom in our house, and it didn't matter who was in there, a member of the family or a visitor to our home. Heather was always asking them to hurry up as she needed to use the facilities. And then it hit me, and her words rushed back. As clear as day, I could remember her saying, "Hurry up, I have to pee." Now, some will say this was a mere coincidence or that my mind was playing tricks on me that morning. And I would say, really? Then how do you explain that my son and I heard the exact same thing at the exact same time? As well, was it a coincidence that this incident occurred on August 17th, Heather's birthday? Or was it something else? Was she reaching out to me? Was she letting me know that she was with me that day? I have no answers, and there are no simple explanations for what happened that morning. To anyone who believes in the paranormal, however, the answer is straightforward. And for me, someone who has studied the paranormal, this experience was further proof that sometimes there really is no simple explanation. Sometimes you just have to suspend belief. And that, my friends, is exactly what I'm asking you to do as we embark on this journey. And that is only one of a few experiences I had. And when I talk about experiencing paranormal experiences, um, I talk about some, I can tell you about experiences I've had going into homes that are, um, said to be haunted, and going in these properties and immediately stepping across the threshold and not necessarily seeing things, but feeling things. If I tell you that in some places you would go that the air feels electric, or that as soon as you enter the house, you can feel the sensations rush through you, and you just know without doubt that um, what you've entered is a place that there's some sort of energy that exists. It could be a spirit or whatnot. And I've seen things move on their own, like a mat of all things. Um, so there are things that happen that we cannot easily explain. And one of my favorite of all the maritime ghost stories that I've researched over the years, the one thing that I I really like talking about and I like writing about are forerunners. Now, for all you Maritimers and Nova Scotians out there, if I ask you what a forerunner is, I'm sure pretty much 100% of you will know what a forerunner is. Well, a forerunner is an omen of death, that a tragedy is going to befall you. And if you've ever encountered a forerunner, you will know for certain what has just happened. And as it's an experience that you're not likely to forget, and it'll leave an indelible mark with you. And so the first thing I want to talk about are experiences with forerunners, because to me, it really embodies our, like the Maritimes in Nova Scotia is an old place with a lot of history and a lot of heritage and culture. And a lot of our superstitions and belief came from the old country, so to speak, and obviously has evolved over the years. But one of the things that have been passed on from generation to generation, or at least my experience has been, are encounters with forerunners. Now, I will admit, I was raised in a family environment where particularly my mother and my grandmother and their family were extremely superstitious people. And I often jokingly say it's a wonder that I was raised halfway normal, because in their world, everything had a reason. Like if a dishcloth fell on the floor, it meant there was a stranger coming. If a bird hit the window, it meant somebody you knew was going to die. If a bird got in your house, it was even worse, because not only was somebody going to die, but if the bird was in your house, it meant somebody in your family was going to die. And there's a whole long list of superstitions and old wives' tales that we've collected over the years and pass on to our children, and so on and so on. And I've actually written a couple books on maritime superstitions. Um, Red Sky at Night, and is one of them. And it's just I'm always fascinated by this, because I think it's part of our oral history, and I love to collect them. I love to hear these things. Old home remedies is another one that really fascinates me. How people centuries ago learned to cope with life when science wasn't. We didn't have the doctors and the scientists to tell us what was going on. Um, and the older people, the generations before us, looked to the world, to the environment around them, to try to find explanations for what they were experiencing. And one of these things is forerunners. And I have experienced personally with a forerunner. It's a long story, and I don't really want to get into too much about it. But I will tell you that this was at a time in the 1980s when I was studying journalism, and I was living in Alberta, and my sister, back here in Nova Scotia, here in Liverpool, was here, and both my sister and I saw, and there was 3 hours apart between Nova Scotia and Alberta, and both my sister and I saw the image of a man who wasn't really there. I saw in the house I was living in at the time, I saw a man in a big black overcoat with a big black brim hat walk up the front walkway of the house I was staying in, and then he wasn't there. And my sister, at the same time, only it would have been 3 hours later here, she was in bed and she awoke and saw a man fitting the same description as I had described, standing at the foot of the bed. And of course, for my mother, that was just an ominous, oh my gosh, somebody was going to die, and it was going to be somebody close to us. And in fact, 3 days later, an uncle died. And so in my mother's world, that was an explanation that, that the forerunner was our uncle coming to visit us. So I'm gonna tell you about a story that was relayed to me by a beautiful, nice lady. I just loved her. She was wonderful to talk to. Her name was Helen, and she has since passed on, as has her husband. And I'm going to read this story, and then I think that'll be a good time to sort of pause and see if anybody else out there maybe wants to, may have a comment or a question, or maybe you've had an experience with a forerunner or something that you would like to share. I'd love to hear it if you do. So this one is called A Mother's Intuition. And so I'm going to start. Call it a gut feeling, call it a sixth sense, or call it intuition, but have you ever known something with certainty, even though you can't explain how you know it? It is possible that all of us have the gift of intuition, but only a few are able to tap into it. Mothers, though, are highly intuitive, especially when it comes to the well being of their children. There have been many documented cases of mothers intuitively knowing when their children were in trouble, even when a great distance has separated them. Many a time, a mother has felt a strong urge to reach out to her child and followed that instinct only to find her child was in distress. Helen and her husband had 3 children, all boys. Arthur was a fisherman who had toiled on the North Atlantic his entire life, and while he earned a good, honest living from the sea, He would be the first to agree that it was also a hard life. The days were long and the conditions were dangerous, with Arthur having survived many close calls during his lifetime. Working on the sea was all Arthur knew, and like his own father and all the men from his family who came before him, he was content with the life he had created for his family. Be that as it may, however, it wasn't a life that he wanted for any of his boys. He hoped his children would grow up and find jobs that would provide a good lifestyle for their own families. But as fate would have it, all three of Arthur's sons followed him to sea, and all three were happy and content to do so. Helen worried about her sons, naturally. She had spent her entire married life worrying and fretting over the safety of her husband, and as each of her sons grew up and took to the seas, she took on the burden of worry for each of them as well. It was a heavy load to carry on her shoulders. She knew firsthand the perils of life of a fisherman, as she had lost many members of her own family to tragedies on the ocean, including her older brother. She waited with bated breath each and every time Arthur or any of her sons went to sea. It was not easy to remain ashore, not knowing what her loved ones were facing, or so many miles out in the open seas. She coped and prayed, accepting that such was the life of a fisherman's wife and mother. Helen had a deep bond with all three of her sons, but the bond ran deepest with her youngest son, Jimmy. Perhaps it was that bond or her intuition that led her to know something was wrong in 1996, long before she knew all the facts. As her two oldest sons grew up, married, and moved out of the house to start their own families, Jimmy remained behind and lived with his parents. That arrangement was just fine with Helen. She knew the day would come when her son would meet someone and move on, but she was prepared to pepper her youngest child with as much love and affection as she could while he was still at home. She liked having her son around the house, but was loathed those times when he went to sea, for she feared he might not return. Sometimes, as the job demanded, Jimmy would be gone for 4 or 5 days at a time, and those long trips were especially hard on his mother. When he wasn't fishing, Jimmy liked to party, and as many young men do, he would go out with his friends, sometimes not returning home until late into the night. This, of course, caused Mum to worry, and she spent many a sleepless night wondering what her youngest son was up to and was he okay. Helen didn't sleep much when Jimmy was out with his friends, and because he was still living under her roof, she had one rule that she insisted he followed. She didn't ask any questions because her son was an adult, but no matter what time he came in at night, she insisted that he come to tell her that he was home and that everything was okay. Knowing how much this meant to his mother, Jimmy followed the rule, and whenever he came home, no matter the time, he would go directly to his parents' bedroom, stand in the doorway, and announce that he was okay. With that reassurance from her son, Helen was able to fall asleep. Sometimes the hour was very late, and while he hated to bother them, he also knew his mother would not be sleeping. While the routine was born from the elderly woman's worries about her son's well-being, in time it kind of became a running joke between the two. But no matter how old Jimmy became, he continued to practice. He continued to practice for many years. Shortly after Jimmy's 26th birthday, he was preparing for a fishing trip that his captain estimated would last 4 or 5 days. Including the captain, there were 4 crew members on board, and Jimmy brought home a good payday for his long hours of work. He was looking forward to this trip because he was saving money for a down payment on a house, and he had been eyeing, and he estimated that these earnings would give him enough to finally make the purchase. But while he was looking forward to the trip, his mother was dreading it. In the days leading up to her son's departure, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She couldn't quite explain it, but she felt there was a dark cloud hanging over her family, and she feared something terrible was about to happen. Because her husband had since retired and neither of her older sons was scheduled to go out in the near future, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was about to happen must involve Jimmy. Fearing the worst, she tried for days to convince Jimmy to skip this trip, telling him that he didn't need the money and offering to pay whatever difference he needed for his down payment on the house. But Jimmy wasn't having any of that. And as he packed his gear, he dismissed his mother's fears as nothing more than the ramblings of a suspicious old woman. On the morning of his departure, he kissed his mother goodbye, as he always did, and he told her he would see her in 4 or maybe 5 days. As he left through the kitchen, he paused at the back door and turned back to tell her not to worry. He insisted he would be okay. But Helen was not so sure about that, and as she watched her youngest son walk down the back steps and disappear down the back walkway on his way to the wharf, she felt a deep gnawing in the pit of her stomach. Something was wrong, she believed, fearing she would never see her son again. As the next 2 days crept by, the dark cloud followed Helen wherever she went. She could not shake the oppressive feeling that tragedy was near. She prayed that her son and his fellow crew members were okay and that they would make it safely back to port. On the night of the second day of Jimmy's trip, Helen was having an especially difficult time sleeping. Tossing and turning, she remembers glancing at the digital clock on the night table next to her bed. In glowing red numbers, the clock said it was 12:15 a.m. Just then, she felt a strong urge to turn around, and when she did, she was surprised to see Jimmy standing in the doorway. He said to her, "Don't worry, Mom, everything is okay. You can go to sleep now." While Helen was surprised to see Jimmy standing there because he wasn't due back in port for at least another 2 days, perhaps even 3. As a fisherman's wife, she knew that many things can happen out at sea that may force the boat to return earlier than scheduled. Perhaps there was engine trouble. Perhaps the catch was good and they filled their hold early. Perhaps someone was sick or injured and needed medical attention. Perhaps there was a storm at sea that they didn't know about back on land. Whatever was going on, Helen took comfort in knowing that Jimmy was home and knowing that she could get the details from him in the morning. She rolled over and went to sleep. The next morning, as Helen and Arthur were in the kitchen having breakfast, the telephone rang. She quickly picked up the receiver after the first ring because she didn't want the noise to wake her son. On the right page. As Helen spoke to whoever was on the phone, Arthur knew something was wrong as he watched his wife turn every shade of white he could imagine. Quickly placing her hand over the phone, she told him to go upstairs and check on Jimmy. Without questioning his wife's instructions, Arthur immediately went up the stairs. Upon his return, a few minutes later, he informed his wife that Jimmy was not in his bed, and furthermore, it didn't look like anyone had slept in the bed last night. No, Helen cried, dropping the phone. She insisted that Jimmy had come home last night and that he had spoken to her. Picking up the phone, Arthur listened while one of the captains from the wharf told him that Jimmy's boat was missing and that they had no contact with them since, are you ready for it? 12:15 a.m. According to the man from the wharf, that was the last time that any known transmission was sent from Jimmy's boat, and it was feared that the boat and all 4 crew members had been lost. But how could that be? That is a question that haunted Helen in the years following the tragedy. I knew something was wrong, she told me. I knew Jimmy was in trouble long before that boat went down. Had Helen seen Jimmy's forerunner, a celestial image of a person in distress or imminent danger? Did the young man reach out to his mother during the last few minutes of his life to let her know he was okay? Helen went to her grave thinking, yes, indeed, that is exactly what happened. And that's a forerunner. And I can tell you from talking to Helen personally and hearing her story a couple of times, the emotions and the the sadness that came with the story was very compelling. Now, there are people who will likely say that what happened was the woman's way of dealing with the grief of losing her youngest child. That it was her way of coping with the tragedy, and that may be so. I'm not a psychiatrist or don't know that personally or not, but having experienced a forerunner myself, I believe it's very possible that she has some sort of an experience. And you know what? I believe that if that was her way of coping with the situation, then that was just fine. If she could get some comfort in thinking that her son reached out to her uh, on his last moments on earth, then good for her. I was happy that she could find some comfort in that. Losing a child cannot be easy, and if that gave her some comfort, then what a wonderful thing for her. Um, so with that story of a forerunner, I'm going to see if anybody else has had any experiences with forerunners or has any questions. If I can't answer your question, I'll pretend I know what I'm talking about and try to answer it anyway. Maybe make something up. You might not know the difference. Just kidding. So I'm going to ask the technical guys, to see if there is anyone there who has anything to say other than myself.
There are no raised hands right now, Vernon.
Okay, I'm going to have a
you
drink.
should continue.
I guess the other question is, did I put people to sleep? Or maybe that's maybe people have turned off their computer. So one more on because I'm so fascinated by forerunners. I do want to talk about this, and this is a good time to do it because I should say that forerunners can appear any time of the year, and they come to people in great emotional distress sometimes. But oftentimes they come out of the blue as well when you're not expecting it. You'll see it, like when I saw the forerunner that my sister and I saw at the same time. I was not even thinking about that sort of thing. In fact, it was 1980, back in the early 1980s, and that was the furthest thing from my mind at that time. I was young and studying, and it was a Saturday night, and wasn't really even thinking about too much like that. So I wasn't prepared or expecting it. But forerunners, while Helen's experience was with the image and talking with her son, in fact, she heard him speak. Forerunners can also take the sound of a sound, or a noise. For example, if you hear 3 knocks at your door or at your window, and there's no one there, that's a forerunner, or as they sometimes call them on these parts, a token. And the belief is that when you hear those knocks, it is death coming to call, and you can answer the door at your own peril if you wish. But it usually means that there's an impending death with someone you know. And these deaths, after hearing or seeing a forerunner, usually occur. They can occur from that moment forward, but usually up to and including 3 days after you experience the forerunner. So, just something to be aware of. And here's another one that I like, and I want to share with you. It's called "The Song of the Whippoorwill." And as we said, forerunners are common in Nova Scotia folklore. But what is exactly a forerunner? A forerunner is a premonition of death, a precursor of tragedy, a warning, an omen, a foretelling or foreboding of something dark, a harbinger of evil. There are many ways to describe a forerunner, but no matter how you choose to define them in Nova Scotia, forerunners are always associated with death, and anyone who has experienced such a phenomenon will agree it's unlike anything else they've ever encountered. One of those people is Bill Williams. Bill, who was born and raised in Nova Scotia, relates a personal experience from a few years back that centers around the death of his sick father, Raymond. We pick up the story in August 2016. Dad had been sick for almost a year, Bill recalls, explaining that near the end of his life, his father had been confined to hospital with liver cancer. It was a terrible time for everyone in the family because Dad was suffering really bad and in excruciating pain. No one wanted to see him die, but it was hard seeing him like that. I couldn't stand to watch him suffer, but there was nothing they could do for him except keep him comfortable, which I guess was all that we could ask for. Bill, the oldest of three children in the family, had always been close to his father. He has fond memories of when he, as a child, he spent quality time with his dad, and he recalls that he and his father enjoyed many hours traipsing all over Nova Scotia looking for birds. Dad was an avid bird watcher, and I remember him packing us up and heading off in different places, to different places to look for various rare species that he needed to add to his list. Bill explains. He kept extensive and detailed records of every bird he had ever seen over the years, including the date, time, and location. He would also include details about how many were in the flock or if it was a solitary bird. He was really into that stuff and made sure I understood why it was important to keep track of birds. The records also include intricate details of each bird, such as its color, its size, if it appeared to be healthy or not, and whether it was a male or female member of the species. I really enjoyed those trips with Dad, Bill recalls. We spent many hours together out in a boat in the wilderness and remote areas. We would travel from one end of the province to the other, looking for some elusive bird that Dad had heard about through his extensive network of fellow bird watchers. These trips became our special time, and today, when I think of those times, I'm happy to have the memories. As Bill grew older and his interests took him elsewhere, his adventures with his father became fewer and fewer until they eventually stopped altogether. But he knew his father continued to search for rare and elusive birds, all the while keeping extensive records of his journeys. Now I'm very glad to have the record books, Bill says, adding that they give him a very detailed outline of his father's experiences and their earlier trips together. Those books are very special to me. They're kind of my way of keeping him close to me. One of the things he recalls about his father was his uncanny talent to mimic the bird calls. It was amazing, really amazing, Bill says, pointing out that whenever his dad did a call, it was pretty much impossible to distinguish between the real thing and the impersonation. He had a talent, that's for sure. Over the years, his father had perfected dozens of bird calls, but the one that he loved the most was doing the song of the whippoorwill, a medium-sized nightjar found throughout North America. The way Dad could mimic that bird was simply beautiful, Bill proudly proclaims. It was mesmerizing the way he could make that bird come to life by duplicating its song. He entertained many people with his skills, and everyone was amazed. I wish I could do it, but I could never get the hang of it. Dad tried to teach me many times, but I just didn't have the knack of it. Dad, on the other hand, was really a natural at it. I swear you'd think the real bird was in the room. It was Raymond's talent to duplicate the song of the whippoorwill that united father and son as death was approaching. And as the emotion takes hold, Bill says he remembers the events just as if they had happened only yesterday. In the end, I spent as much time as I could in the hospital with Dad. Thank God I run my own business because that gave me the flexibility to come and go as I needed to. During the last few weeks of Dad's life, I was at the hospital more than I was at the office. But I just had to be there with him. Mom had died a few years earlier, and my sisters lived out of the province, so it was just me and I couldn't leave him alone. They were difficult weeks, Bill remembers, as the emotions on his face betray the raw pain that he continues to suffer to this day. I hated to see him like that. Even though the doctors did what they could for him, I could tell he was still suffering, and it just made me feel so helpless. The only thing I could do was be with him, and I was there whenever I could be. Watching a loved one in those last days of his life or her life is among the most difficult things that anyone will ever have to endure. But Bill remained by his father's side, talking to him, reading him books, and simply holding his hand. I tried my best not to cry around him, but what can you do? When you're staring death in the face, your emotions have a way of taking over, and at times it just became too much, and I had to leave, even just for a few minutes. Near the end, Bill says he could tell that his father was slipping away, and it took all his strength to sit beside the bed and watch the man that he loved fade from this world into whatever awaited on the other side. I remember it was late in the afternoon on a Thursday in August when the nurse who was keeping watch over him came to me and told me I should go home for a bit just to give myself a break. She could tell I was nearing the end of my rope. I was exhausted and emotionally drained. She suggested that an hour or so away from the hospital would do me good, and she promised that if anything changed, she would call me right away so that I could come back and be with Dad. Even though Bill felt guilty about leaving his father's side, he thought that maybe a brief reprieve might actually do him good. So he agreed to go home, but only after the nurse assured him that she would call him at even the slightest change in his father's condition. Since I only live about 10 minutes from the hospital, it meant I could get back quickly if Dad needed me. I went home, where I found the house was empty. My wife was at work and our children were spending time with their friends, so the place was quiet, too quiet. I don't like it when it's that still. It kind of gives me the creeps because you can hear everything, and considering the state I was in, that wasn't a good thing. Stopping at the kitchen counter to check the mail that had been piled there, Bill says he had just begun to make his way through the letters when, out of the blue, he heard a whippoorwill. It stopped me cold in my tracks, he recalls. I froze. I literally could not move. The cold chills ran up my back, and the little hairs on my arms rose as I shook from head to toe. I had heard that song too many times not to recognize it. I knew without a doubt that it was the whippoorwill. But how could that be? There was no one else in the house except Bill. All the radios and televisions were off. There was simply no explanation for what he had heard. No worldly explanation, that is. I was dumbfounded, really. I honestly didn't know what to do, and for a few seconds, I just stood there wondering what to do next. I thought my mind must be playing tricks on me because there is simply no way I could have heard what I thought I heard. Then he heard the song again for a second time, and this time I knew right away what was going on, Bill says, choking back his tears. I knew it was the whippoorwill, and I knew it was Dad. Immediately after the second bird call, his cell phone rang, and he instinctively knew what was happening. I knew that Dad had died before I answered the phone, Bill says with conviction. I am convinced that Dad knew he was going to die, and he waited until I left the room to do it because he didn't want me to be there when it happened. I honestly believe that he didn't want me to see him die because he thought it would be too painful for me to witness. As for the song of the whippoorwill, Bill says he knows what he heard that day in his house, and he is 100% certain that it was the bird call that his father used to make. I believe in my heart that Dad reached out to me as he was dying and sent that whippoorwill song to me as a message, he insists. I am sure that Dad was telling me that I should not worry about him because he was going to be all right and that he was no longer in any pain. Call it a forerunner or whatever you want, but for Bill, that song of the whippoorwill was the last thing he ever received from his father, and he takes comfort in the fact that while he can't logically explain what happened to him that day, he is certain that his father is doing okay and is no longer suffering. So that is another forerunner story, and I could do a whole session on forerunners, but I don't want to do that. And I do want to get into a couple other little other stories, types of stories. And do we have any questions, guys?
Not at this time. If you want to go and continue, or if you'd like to take a break. Oh, no, I have a raised, Vernon, I have a raised hand. If you just give me a second here, I'll see what we do. Hang on. Okay, Anne has a question. I'm going to allow Anne to talk and we'll see how this goes.
Hello,
Anne,
can you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
I can.
Oh, good. Well, actually, I've got several stories, but you're probably short on time.
No, go for it.
Okay. About in the early 90s, I lived in Lahr, Germany, for a period of time. I was married to a military person at the time. And the PMQ, the married quarters that we lived in, it was consisted of 6 flats, 3 on one side and 3 on the other side of the building. And the type of architecture was of a French style. And as you're aware, like the French and Germany border went back and forth. So it probably was originally built by French. But in that building, when we arrived, there were rumors that the whole building had strange events that happened. They weren't unfriendly, and as you mentioned, it's not a scary, like a poltergeist feeling. You just were aware of a presence, always. And for example, like on the 3rd floor of one side of the building, a couple had moved out. They had been reposted back to Canada. And but the people underneath there, with the whole flat vacant, would hear like chairs being scraped across the kitchen floor, which had marble floors, and dishes being smashed like wine glasses and so on. So, obviously, the whatever it was maybe upset that night. I don't know. But however, the my daughter, who was 16, my younger daughter, who was 16 at the time, of course, she delighted in the fact that she could go to a bar in Germany because the legal drinking age was 16, and so she would come home at night and unlock the front door. And she said, I always felt creepy when I would come in that front door. Never seen anything. But anyway, onward with many stories. It apparently, what people would hear would be walking up and down the hardwood floors in the hallway with what you would picture as tall leather boots, of a soldier.
Yep.
So this apparition that was never seen, always just heard, was affectionately called the Colonel, because he just did his thing. Like one girl experienced when her husband would go out in the field on army practice, she would hear the boots and then get the feeling that someone would sit on the mattress beside her, with the sinking feeling of a body going in that mattress and releasing. And but my personal experience, there were several little things that happened that I would always hear sounds when nobody was in the flat below us, and that kind of thing. But so our bedroom had the windows that swung outward and no screens, so you were selective as when you left the windows open, not in fly season. But anyway, on a chest of drawers on the other side of the room, far from the window, I had pictures of my 3 children in frames. 2 of them were in Halifax going to college, and the youngest was with me. So we had a dog, and I would quite often walk down to the military grocery store, and I would come back. And this one particular day, I came back, and the picture frame of my son was face first on the bureau top. The other 2 girls were fine. So I stood it up again, and then on another day, not long after that, I went for a stroll again. I came back, and the picture of my son was face first down on the bureau. So I had an eerie feeling because, excuse me, I guess I'm kind of like you. I've been aware of things happening, and I try not to talk about it too much because, they think you're kind of cuckoo. But anyway, not long after that, within that week, I had a phone call from Halifax from my son saying, well, Mom, I don't want you to worry. Everything's all okay. But I was driving, like, he had borrowed my car for the time that I was in Germany, and somebody slid on the ice and smashed into the car, and I ended up in the ditch, where he was very fortunately not injured. The car was, but not him. But I took that aha. So isn't that interesting, And then to jump ahead, when I came back to Canada, this, I don't know what you would call this. Now, you would probably have, a term for it. So by now, my children are married, and the two other mother-in-laws came with me, as we thought would be a fun afternoon, to go to a lady in Dartmouth who read tea leaves. And so we went, and each one of us had notebooks that we would write each other's stories as the lady read the tea leaves. She had her back to us, not even looking at our faces, and she had 3 cups of tea. So I have to just regress a little bit because in my childhood, my father, who was a graduate engineer of Nova Scotia Tons at the time, he passed away very suddenly when I was 6. So now here I am, an adult at that time would have been, elderly enough that my children are married. But anyway, so she got to me, and the thing that she said, I see a man there, a very tall man, and he's telling me that he's so sorry that he left you so soon. He's so very sorry. And okay, and I'm thinking now, how would she ever know that? How would she ever know that? And my father was like 6'2", and he said, there's a woman standing beside him. And I said, is that my mother? And he said, no, that lady died 19 years after your father. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is weird. That was his mother. Exactly. He died in 1951 and she died in 1970. So then what was the real cruncher that nobody else knew, not even my children, he says, don't forget you've got the box of my protractor, the type of pen that you dipped in ink at that time, and my compass and my slide rule. And in my closet, there is a box with exactly that. And because of the few things that I had of my father, like things from his uniform and just little mementos, I have that box with those very things in it. And that blew me away completely. Wow. So like you say, when a person passes, where is that spirit? Where does it go? It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. That is that's phenomenal. I mean, that's, and when you experience it and put it in words, it becomes so real, right? I mean,
it does.
You have to.
Yes.
And how do you explain that for those people who are so skeptical out there? How do you how do you dismiss those? How would that person know all those things about your dad? And
she would not know.
Yeah,
she
and
didn't
in the box. I mean, how would she know that?
I don't know how she knew. And, you know, like, and to have my children's two mums-in-law, which were very good friends, to have written that down on their notepads, exactly what she was saying. So it wasn't like I went in alone and made it up coming out. They heard it as well. And the fact that it, you know, it wasn't something I displayed or brought out for the kids. It was my little keepsake of my father. I know. And then we wanted to go back to this lady and talk to her. And unfortunately, she slipped in her bathtub and died.
Oh my gosh.
But probably maybe within a year or so later, you know. And I had sent several people to this lady who were kind of like wanting to hear her, but she was amazing. That's all I can say. She was amazing.
That is,
yeah, she had.
That's something. And then the thing about your son's picture is interesting as well.
Exactly.
You know.
Oh yeah.
In when those things happen, like, and then you were indeed lucky that he was just telling you that there's something was going on, but the fact that he was okay was you know, certainly good for that. But you know, how do these things, you can't look for a rational explanation because there just isn't one.
No, there isn't.
There's no way to explain how that sort of thing happens. Well, those are amazing, Anne. I thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really enjoyed them. I think you and I are kindred spirits. We could have long conversations about this stuff.
Oh well, I've got more I could talk about, but I must get your book. So you know,
should be in any of the bookstores, Chapters or Kohl's. I'm not sure where you're located, but you can always order them online as well. So.
Oh, good. Okay, then. Thank you very much. Well, it's been very, very interesting today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else, guys? Technical guys?
Nothing showing right now, Vernon.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end. It's almost, well, it is 10 after. I do want to leave you with a story that is called The Face in the Mirror. And I'm doing this purposefully because I chose this one because, you know, we are always, there's a misnomer that spirits and ghosts have to be, you know, historical in nature, that only old houses can be haunted or possessed or have a spirit with them. In fact, that's not the case. You know, spirits can exist from any time period, and they can be in a house, you know, new house. I've been in new houses where there's definitely something going on there. And spirits aren't necessarily attached to a place. A spirit can be attached to a person, place, or thing. You know, like a rocking chair. We've all heard stories of seeing grandmothers in rocking chairs, or stories of sea chests, captain sea chests with, with seeing an old man connected with that. Or in museums, a lot of museums will say they have spirits because something came in, a spirit may have come in with an object that had a spirit attached to it. So we know that spirits can be attached, you know, to different things in different time frames, and they can be current or they can be historical. There's stories, many stories from around the region of historical spirits. I'm going to tell you this one. It's called The Face in the Mirror. And I don't reveal too much about this young woman's personal life because she was very distraught, and she only agreed to talk to me because I knew her personally. She let me tell her story only on the conditions that I not reveal anything about her. So it's kind of vague with the details on her personal life, but I'm going to tell you the story, and it drives home to me that the unexpected can happen even when, you know, well, we're never prepared for the unexpected, are we? That's a silly thing to say. So this is called The Face in the Mirror. It was a rough night as far as Nancy was concerned. A nurse of 7 years, she had just completed her night shift at the local hospital. And after a challenging 12 hours, she was exhausted. The only thing she wanted to do was get home, get out of her uniform, and flop into bed. She was so tired. All she could think about was sleeping. But then she was even too tired to sleep. She's seen a lot during her time as a nurse, even more tragedy and suffering than any human being should have to deal with. But she understands that's part of the profession, and she has learned to cope with the emotions that come with the job. But some shifts are worse than others, and this recent night shift was one of the worst of her career, highlighted with a fatal motor vehicle accident that claimed the lives of 2 people. Having to deal with distraught family members is never easy, she explains. And this incident was particularly tough as the deceased were a mother and her child. It was a sad incident. They're all sad, and many of them test your faith in God, if you believe in such things, she says. But this one was especially tough. The mother was only 24, and the child was still young, only 4. They were involved in a head-on collision when another car crossed the center line and hit them. I didn't see the accident, but I heard it was a real mess. She says the mother died at the scene, but the child was still alive when they pulled him from the wreck. He was in bad shape with serious injuries, and Nancy says everyone knew it was doubtful he would survive. In the end, the young boy hung on until he reached the hospital, where he died shortly after he arrived in the ER where Nancy works. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. And as a nurse, I deal with death all the time. But it's especially difficult when it's a child involved, she says. You feel so bad for the family, but there's nothing you can do except to comfort them. And what do you say to a young husband and father who has lost his family? His world just fell apart, and there's nothing you can say to comfort him. It was really heartbreaking. Nancy says she doesn't think she will ever forget the face of that young boy, all bloodied and bruised as he lay on the stretcher after the paramedics brought him in. Nor will she ever be able to get the father's face out of her mind. It broke my heart because you just feel so helpless when you're dealing with something like that. The boy's father was just devastated, but what would you expect? Those images will be there for the rest of my life, she says. I had contact with the boy and his father. I never came into contact with the deceased woman. And that's why the details of what happened after I got home continue to haunt me to this day. It may have been my imagination or my emotions getting the best of me, but I don't think so. She stresses that what happened while she was in the bathroom getting ready for bed was one of the most bizarre things she has ever experienced. I got home, and after taking care of the usual personal business, I just couldn't bring myself to go to bed because I knew I wouldn't be able to fall asleep, she says. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the broken body of that dear, sweet little boy, and the cries from the boy's father kept echoing in my head. It was just terrible, so I thought that maybe a nice long hot shower might help me relax. Nancy says she had no idea how long she was in the shower, but she remembers that when she emerged from the water, she couldn't get over how much steam there was in the bathroom. There was so much steam in the bathroom that I couldn't see anything, she says. The mirror was completely obliterated by the steam. Whenever that happens, I usually just wipe the mirror with the bath towel, and that's what I did that day, she recalls. It was difficult keeping the mirror clear because every time I would wipe it dry, it would just fog up again. I think I had to wipe it down 4 or 5 times until it was finally clear enough for me to use. Only I wish I had never cleared it. For Nancy, who says she had never really considered herself to be the superstitious type or someone who would believe in ghosts, the next part of the story is especially difficult for her to tell. But I swear to God that this really happened, she stresses. Nancy explains that it's important to note that she lives alone and there was no one else in her apartment with her on this particular morning. That's important to understand because after I wiped the mirror clear and I looked into it, what I saw scared the life out of me. When I looked into the mirror, what I saw was a different person, a woman looking back at me, she says. It scared her so badly, she says, that she immediately broke down in tears. She also went immediately to the phone and called her mother because she had to tell someone what what was happening in her apartment. Mom couldn't believe it either, Nancy says. She was especially freaked out after what I told her next. Despite never having met the woman who had died in the car accident, Nancy explained she had a clear image of what the young mother and wife looked like, as her husband had showed her a picture of his wife when he came to the hospital to be with their son. There is no doubt in my mind that the face looking back at me from the mirror was that of the woman who had died in the horrific car accident the previous night, Nancy says. Was her mind playing tricks on her, or was she so emotionally distraught over the accident that she imagined seeing the woman? She agrees that is possible, but not likely, she says. I know what I saw, and I know for certain that when I looked into the mirror, it wasn't me staring back at me. I'm 100% convinced that the woman looking back at me was the deceased woman. The bigger question on Nancy's mind wasn't so much if it was the woman or not, but rather, why would the spirit of this deceased woman reach out to her? And how would she know where to find her? I never had any contact with the woman, Nancy says. She died at the scene, and if they brought her body to the hospital, I didn't see it. So I have no idea why she would reach out to me. The only thing she can think of is she says is that she may have been the last person to see the little boy alive just before he passed. I suppose it's possible that in some way this woman tried to reach out to me because of my contact with her son, Nancy says, but obviously I just don't know. She says despite being scared to death, in a way it's comforting to think that this mother, who would never be with her little boy again, was perhaps trying to find him. The image lasted only a few seconds, but I'll admit that I was freaking out. I'll admit I was freaking out, but I remember that the woman seemed so sad, and I remember that I instantly felt sad for her. Whatever compelled this woman to reach out to Nancy will never be known, but her sudden appearance has convinced Nancy that there is more to life than we can imagine. Was this the woman's spirit or ghost, Nancy wonders? I've never been one to believe in such things, but I have to tell you that after seeing that woman's face in the mirror, I'm convinced that there's more to this life than could ever be known. Now, after all this, I'm just not so sure, as I'm sure many of us aren't. So that's the face in the mirror. Quite an emotional story, and to hear the person tell you that story who experienced it. As I said, this was a woman who I've known for a long time, and she's a very rational, very matter of fact, and very logical. And, you could say it was her emotions taking over, and it may have been, but even to this day, after several years of having the experience, she's still, when she relives the moment, it's still very real to her. And who can say? And with that, if there's any other questions, I'll take them. If not, I'm going to turn things back over to Barbara. I do just want to say thank you. I hope you found it interesting and a fun hour. Well, I guess almost an hour and a half. And thank you for tuning in. And I've enjoyed it. Barbara?
Wow. Thank you so much, Vernon, for a fascinating presentation. As Hamlet said, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
True enough.
Amazing, amazing, yeah. And thanks to everyone for being with us. I also want to thank our wonderful, wonderful tech crew, Bob Russell and Bill Lee. I hope you'll join us again for our next lecture, when on Tuesday, November the 23rd at 10 o'clock, Delvina Bernard will explain what is currently happening about reparations for the historical harm done to African Nova Scotians and how it impacts on our lives today. And Delvina will take questions about this difficult topic. Please continue to check our website for our next series of courses. I'm sure many of you, like me, are taking courses at the moment. I think the most difficult thing about it is choosing which ones to take. I'd also like to encourage everyone, no matter what your skills or lack of skills, to volunteer for scans. It's a wonderful, wonderful group of people and a lot of fun. So if you have any time at all, please do contact us and let us know. So take care, everyone, and we really hope to see you soon. Bye.